I don't even have a plan when I start a book, you know. And sometimes readers don't believe me about this. I feel guilty when I see a quote on my books which says, another ingeniously plotted novel by Stephen Booth. I don't have a plot. You know, that's just wrong. I don't start with a plot. I don't know what's going to happen in my books. I don't know how it's going to end. I don't know who did it. None of that stuff, you know. It's all a discovery process for me as I'm writing. I discover the story as I'm going along, which is a much more exciting way of writing. If something in one of my books surprises you, the chances are it surprised me too. So I didn't know it was going to happen. And I think I'm very lucky that I'm writing about police detectives, really, because the way I see it is it's their job to go out and find out what happened, because they're the detectives, I'm just the writer. And if they do their part of the job, then that works. And I rely totally on Ben and Diane and their colleagues to go out and do their job and discover the story for me. And in a way, as a writer, what I have to do is take a step back and give them the freedom to do that, and not try to control them too much. And that just works for me. 14 books, it's worked, so. This is one of the things I feel very guilty about, because readers often ask this, and I don't understand how writers can work like that, really, to have that sort of fixed regime. I've heard people say, you know, oh, I get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, I write for 2 hours, have breakfast, write for another 2 hours, and then that's it for the day, you know. And some people say, oh, I write exactly 3,000 words a day. How do you do it? What, you stop in the middle of a sentence? You know, when you get to... I don't understand that, really. But I do feel quite guilty about it, because the first 2 books in the series were written while I still had the day job. I was a local newspaper journalist in North Nottinghamshire. So the only time I had to write was in the evenings when I came home from work. And when you've got a very limited amount of time to writing, you make the best use of it, don't you? And I was very disciplined. Every night I would come home, sometimes quite late, have something to eat, sit down in front of the computer and just write into the early hours of the morning. You know, 1 o'clock in the morning was quite normal. And that first book in the series, Black Dog, was written in 4 months, I think, just writing in the evenings. And now that I'm full-time, which I have been for about 12, 13 years, it takes me a year to write a book, which is wrong, isn't it? You know, I mean, it just feels wrong to me. But there are so many other things involved in being a writer, certainly at the level I'm at now. There's all the promotion and marketing I do. You know, I do a lot of events all around the country. The first few years when I was published, I was in America for 5 weeks of the year, just touring around and going to conventions, and I don't write when I'm doing that. And there are all those other things, you know, contact with your editors and agents and publicists, contact with readers. I like to answer all the emails I get from readers where possible. I'm also on Twitter and Facebook, and I do an email newsletter and my website and a forum. You know, it's all part of the job, and I tend to find that all those things are distractions during the day. So I can actually sit at my desk all day and not have written a word. And my writing time is in the evenings when it's quieter, there are fewer distractions. And I think that's just my creative time, really. Late at night is when my brain's most active, so I tend to be writing still now into the early hours of the morning, which is not really the best way to do it, I don't think, because the story can still be buzzing around your head when you're trying to go to sleep. I realise that most reviews, particularly readers' reviews, don't tell you very much about the book, they tell you a lot about the reader. Somebody once said, it was a German philosopher who said that a book is a mirror. When you're reading a book, the book is also reading you. And it's discovering all kinds of things about your personality, and you bring all your experience and all your likes and dislikes to a book. And that's why every reader has an entirely different response to a book. If you've been a member of a book club, you've probably sat next to somebody who you thought you knew very well, and when they start talking about the book, you think, they've read an entirely different book to me. And as an author, sometimes you'll look at your reviews on one of the online booksellers who I won't name, out of respect for our friends at the back there. And you can see that one reader has a totally different reaction to a book from the previous one, and they think it sounds as though they were reading a different book, but actually what's changed in between is not the book, but the reader. Well, all of my books, as I said, are set in the Peak District, and there are several reasons why I chose to set them in the Peak District. It's a perfect setting for me. It has all these wonderful atmospheric locations that I use in the books. It has all those thousands of years of history, and much of that history is actually right there in the landscape, like the stone circles and the remains of the old lead mining industry, right there for my characters to touch and see in the landscape. It's also not only our first national park, but I'm told it's the second most visited national park in the world after Mount Fuji in Japan. And for the same reason, because it's not remote. You know, it has all those cities and large towns right on the doorstep. And that creates all kinds of inherent conflicts in the Peak District and allows me to explore one of the subjects I'm very interested in, which is the relationship between the city and the countryside. And I also like the fact that the Peak District has these two distinct geological halves. You know, there's the White Peak and the Dark Peak. Very different areas. The White Peak is these pretty limestone villages and wooded valleys with streams running through them, farming country, whereas the Dark Peak is these vast expanses of bleak moorland with dark, twisted outcrops of rock on them, with its own beauty, I always think. But when I thought about that, you know, the Dark Peak and the White Peak, the symbolism for me as a writer was obvious. I mean, dark and light, it's good and evil, isn't it? And it's right there in the landscape for me to use in the stories. It is the central characters who have driven the Cooper and Fry series over the course of 14 books, particularly Ben Cooper and Diane Fry, the two main characters. They're the ones who keep bringing readers back to the books, and that relationship between those two characters. Ben is the one who has the most fans around the world. He's the more sympathetic of the two characters. Readers really love Ben, I've found. I can remember an American reader who wrote to me and she said, I think Ben Cooper is the most wonderful human being I've ever met. Which is wrong on a couple of counts, isn't it? But, you know, that's the way that readers like to react to Ben, which is great. Diane Fry perhaps is not as sympathetic as Ben, though she does have her fans, as does Gavin Murphy, who's one of the minor characters. You know Gavin? And I'm very pleased to say that I even now get people who are fans of one of the younger detective constables, Luke Irving, who I'm bringing on a little bit. He's got his own fans. And after what the events in the last two books, Dead and Buried and Already Dead, a lot of readers have said to me, I hope something nice can happen for Ben, because he's been through quite a lot over those two books. Well, I can tell you that there are a couple of things which do happen for Ben in this new book. I'm leaving it up to readers to decide whether they're good for him or not, because obviously all of these things are open to interpretation. I started off at the very beginning of the series deciding to make my two characters young. They were both in the 20s at the start of the series, and they were both detective constables. because I thought as a reader that at that time there were already far too many world-weary, middle-aged, alcoholic loners in crime fiction. Because they were always men, and they were always at least inspector or chief inspector rank. And it had been done very well by other people, so I thought I'll make my characters young. And that was a great decision to make in the first book, because it's allowed me to let my characters age, and things can happen in their lives as they do to all of us. They can form relationships and break up relationships, they can get promoted, and all kinds of things can happen to them, which indeed they have over the course of 14 books. My characters are aging quite slowly. Sometimes this is a question readers ask, how much do they age in between books? And it's a decision you have to take at the beginning of a series. I can remember Ian Rankin, who wrote the Inspector Rebus series, deciding that Rebus would age in real time. So if a year passes between publication of books, a year passes in Rebus's life, which meant that everybody could work out when Inspector Rebus had to retire. Because everybody knew when he would be 60, and that would be the end of the series. I decided not to do that, and my characters are aging slowly. And one of the reasons for that is that I tend to leave things at the end of each book with something dramatic happening in the lives of one of the characters, which I then have to pick up on in the next book. And I didn't feel that I could just leave that and then say, right, now it's a year later and we've all forgotten about that. That just didn't seem right to me. So I pick up the story 3 or 4 months later, so it's still fresh, everything's fresh in people's minds still. Which means that my characters are only aging at a slow pace, 4 books over the course of a year in fictional time. And that's starting to get quite complicated now, because they're still in their early 30s after 14 books. But it does mean that I have the potential for a long series. I worked out one day that at that rate, there was a possibility for 80 books in the series before Ben and Diane would have to retire from Derbyshire Constabulary. I don't know who'd be writing them by then. It obviously wouldn't be me, but that's what gave me the potential. So I'm up to 14 books in the series now. I've never known how many there were going to be, but I'm hoping that if readers keep enjoying the books, then that will enable me to keep writing them. I actually sold a TV option in the first book, Black Dog, almost straight away when it was published. And it's been ongoing since then, 14 years. And it was so strange, because I started to get very blasé about it at one point. We had so many, every time a new book came out, somebody would be interested in doing it for TV, and nothing ever happened. And I got so fed up a bit that I can remember my agent phoned me one day and said, oh, we've had the BBC interested today in doing your books. And I just went, oh yeah, again. And nothing ever came of it. It was very, very strange. At the moment, I've sold the rights in all 14 books to a production company, a very good production company whose work you would know on TV. They've got a terrific track record. We've got a finished script, already written for the first episode, all ready to go. And we're waiting for the TV network just to commit themselves to commission, because they've got to put the money in. And that's the big hurdle. And it's been dragging on for a little while now. They keep saying, we really want to do Cooper and Fry, but it's just not quite the right time. And that's the way it seems to be in TV. It just goes on and on and on, and you just sort of keep your fingers crossed that it's going to happen. And here's one of the, I don't talk about this very, very much, but here's one of the strange things about being an author. You find yourself in competition with your friends. Yeah, really. I can remember a previous TV production company had the rights to my books, and they were making them. They'd been asked to commission a TV drama for Sky, who were putting a lot of money into dramas at that time. And they contacted my agent and said this was what they were doing, and they narrowed it down to 2 series of crime novels, and they wanted the authors to come down to London to talk about them so they could choose between the 2, and I was one of them. Right? So I had to go down to London for this meeting with the TV producer. I didn't know who the other series of books was by, but I walked into this producer's office in London, and she had a shelf full of my books, Cooper and Fry novels, and she had a shelf full of John Harvey's Resnick novels. And John Harvey's been one of my heroes for years, you know, and I would love to see those done again for TV. But I was put in this position where I've got to try and persuade this woman not to do them and do mine instead, you know, and it's a really difficult position to find yourself in. And actually, as it turned out, they'd already decided. I don't know why. You know, you don't ask these things. So whether John had already been down and they didn't like him, or whether they already decided for some other reason that mine were the ones they wanted to do. And actually, that fell through. That didn't happen because Sky. It was just about the time the recession came along, and there was no money around. And Sky said that mine were going to be too expensive to do, because drama is the most expensive form of television you can produce anyway, but once you go out on location in the Peak District with all your cast and your crew to do location filming, the costs just skyrocket, and they said it was too expensive, and they were going to do something more urban, and they chose a series of novels set in London, which you might know, which was Mark Billingham's Tom Thorne series. So I was pushed out of the way by Mark Billingham, you know, who again is a friend of mine, who I've known for years. That's what it's like. And at the moment, ITV have got DCI Banks running the Peter Robinson series. Again, one of my heroes. I've been reading Peter Robinson's books for years and years and years. And ITV have said they would like to do Cooper and Fry, but not while Inspector Banks is on. So I'm here praying for Inspector Banks to get cancelled. You know, it's a really odd business, and you've just got to try and feel a bit relaxed about it. I was a newspaper journalist for 27 years, and I knew the police pretty well, and I always have done. So I've known the police in all kinds of circumstances, good and bad, I should say. Which, when I started to write the books, I felt I didn't know much about the technical aspects of police procedure, but I thought I knew who the people were, the characters, which is what was important to me. I thought, I know these guys, and I know what would go on in the office, because what I'm trying to do is to draw out the human side of the police. That's always what I'm trying to do. Derbyshire Constabulary have been incredibly helpful to me. They couldn't be more helpful. They'll tell me everything that I want to know, and a lot of things that I don't want to know. But when I go into police stations in Derbyshire, which they do let me do, I'm not looking for the technical stuff, which some of the officers think I am. I'm looking for those human details to help me draw the characters out. And I was very lucky that I made contact quite early on with one of the chief superintendents, who was the divisional commander at B Division in Buxton and then at C Division. And because he was the boss, when he said, "This guy's all right, you can talk to him," everybody did talk to me. And I've been right through all those police stations, talked to the CID and forensics people. I've been out in a police car with an officer, just to get to know what it's like and what they talk about, and pick up some of the anecdotes. I can remember when the air support unit out at Ripley, when they got a new helicopter, I immediately got an email from the manager of the air support unit who said, "Come and look at our new helicopter. It's really cool. It's got all these big lights and cameras." And I don't want to know how the equipment works on a police helicopter. It's not what my books are about. But I went just so I could listen to the guys talk about the job, Because I've found that most people, if you approach them in the right way, and you're prepared just to listen to what they say, people will tell you with great pleasure about their job, about their area of expertise. They will tell you all kinds of things that you would never have thought of asking. If you just sit and listen, it will all come out, and that's gold. That's absolute gold for me. That's what I. But as with all the Cooper and Fry novels, the idea for the story came from just random thoughts, really, that float around in my mind, and when they start to connect, I know that I've got a story. One of the ideas in this particular book was about the old corpse routes or coffin roads. So they got various names around the country. These were the old routes that people in small communities used to have to carry the coffins when somebody died. They used to have to carry them for many miles, sometimes across rough terrain, to a church where they could bury them. And that was entirely because certain people controlled burial rites and wouldn't allow them to bury people in their own communities, because they actually made money from burials. So they made people carry them sometimes for many miles to another church. And of course, lots of superstitions and myths and folklore have grown up around those routes about ghosts and spirits and so forth, about the dead passing along the route. And the other thing I'm thinking of, and people often said to me, you're writing about Derbyshire. You've never mentioned any of the stately homes, the big country houses. And there's some very famous ones out there in Derbyshire, some of which you've probably visited. I mean, one of the best known is Chatsworth House, of course, where the Duke and Duchess of Devonshire live. And I've visited most of those stately homes. And I knew I was going to use them one day, but I had to have a particular reason to use them in a story. And one day I read in the news that the Duke and Duchess were having an attic sale. They were clearing out all the rubbish in their attics at Chatsworth. I mean, we all do that from time to time. But in their case, it was a little bit different, because their attic sale was run by Sotheby's, and it raised £6.5 million. One of the items they sold was a marble chimney piece, which they found in the attic, which sold for £565,000 at the auction. And that's some attic sale, isn't it? But that money, of course, goes to pay for the upkeep of a place, which a place like Chatsworth costs an absolute fortune to maintain. And they have hundreds of staff at a place like that. So £6.5 million is actually a drop in the ocean to the amount of money it costs them to maintain these places. And I started to think about all the ideas that some big landowner might have for making money to keep his house going, and how that might upset a lot of local people. I mean, this does happen because some of those villages are actually owned by the aristocrats who have the big houses. And there I had the conflict, between those two sets of interests. So if you read The Corpse Bridge, you'll find that there is a fictional stately home, which I call Knoll Abbey. And if you visited some of those houses out there, you might find there's a certain sense of familiarity about parts of this stately home. But it is fictional, so I can assure you that no real aristocrats were harmed during the writing of this book.